Welcome everyone to another edition of LinkedIn Live. Today we're going to talk about the SAP Fiori Central Launchpad. So we'll talk about the Central Launchpad service, which is a standard service of the Business Technology Platform on SAP. As always, we give you a couple of, let me just move forward here on the slide. Just a few minutes about who we are, what we do, who is exciting. Then we'll talk about the more details and get a little bit into the Launchpad service to understand how it works, what's the concept, how does the architecture look like, what are most common use cases, and then also differences between access procedures, how users or end users can access that central Launchpad. As always, I have a couple of slides in the end. If you have time left, then we'll do a quick demo. Just want to quickly show you how it looks like, just to get like a feeling. There's also trial versions available on the Business Technology Platform, so kind of like you can try it yourself. I'll have a link there that you can follow and enable it for yourself. But let's get started. Let's jump right into the topic. I'll make myself a little bit smaller here. Just a few words about Exciting. Who are we? What do we do? Exciting has been around since 2008. We are an SAP Gold partner. We have different recognized expertise statuses, for example, in governance, risk, compliance, data security, and so on. Exciting historically has been a SAP security solution and services provider. So we provide software solutions and also consulting services. We do consulting services in everything that comes to SAP security, from authorizations management, the GRC tools, single sign-on, IDM, cloud security, and so on. So everything when it comes to SAP security, that's what we do. With our solutions that are fully certified by SAP, so we have all our solutions are certified. They have the certification for the S/4HANA private cloud. So if you were to install our tools, SAP will gladly do that. That also means that because we have the certification, everything that we do is 100% SAP standard. We don't do anything behind the scenes. We always use released, approved SAP APIs. So everything that we do is 100% following SAP standard. Our solution and our consulting services that we offer in that area are in the area of access governance and compliance. We do a lot of things with SODs, cross-system SODs, finding critical authorizations, segregation of duty conflicts, firefighting capabilities. We do code scanning. We do a lot in the area of security monitoring, where we have the ability to define security concepts and then continuously test the concept against our entire system landscape with integration to CM tools. If anything is out of the ordinary and you want to report that, then we can report that into a CM solution, or in a simplest form, if we don't have CM, could be just email alerts and so on. Obviously, we do a lot in the area of authorizations management. That's also one of the topics we'll talk about today, which is kind of like the Fiori stuff goes into that. So we do obviously a lot in authorizations management, from role redesigns, role implementation, S/4HANA migration, implementing Fiori authorization concepts, and so on. That's also where we have a lot of tool and different functionality around, mass tools, automation tools, simplification tools to make authorizations management more efficient. Also, last but not least, there are certain capabilities in the area of identity access management when it comes to do user provisioning workflows, integration with risk analysis to run, SOD, what if scans, and so on, all the way down to user access certification and certification of access assigned to users. With that, I don't want to spend more time on who we are, what we do. Let's jump into the topic. I want to talk about the Fiori, the Central Launchpad. The Fiori Central Launchpad is basically a cloud service. So it's a SaaS solution at the end of the day. It's a software as a service. It's a service that we can consume in the cloud. With that Launchpad service, we can, at the end of the day, connect different content providers, as SAP calls them. That can be SAP solutions that are on-premise or in the cloud. It can be custom-built applications. So if you have any extensions or custom apps that you created maybe on the Business Technology Platform, HTML5 apps, for example, you can include them into the Central Launchpad, as well as third-party solutions are also possible to integrate. Historically, when we think about S/4HANA, we remember with S/4HANA, in the beginning of S/4HANA, the recommendation was to implement S/4HANA together with Fiori in a central hub deployment. It was called a central hub deployment, where we had a front-end server and then multiple backend server, like for example our S/4HANA, BWs, and so on, but having basically one central Fiori frontend. Over the years, SAP revised that recommendation, and now the recommendation is to have the embedded approach, because there are dependencies between the front end and the backend server if you run it on premise. To counter those restrictions and dependencies that we had, now we have the possibility with the cloud-based central Launchpad service to combine multiple backend services and also embedded implementations into one central Launchpad. So with the central Launchpad service, we can now connect to different applications, and we have one core entry point for our end users where they can access all different type of applications that we have connected to that central Launchpad service in the cloud. The content providers, and we'll see it later as well, so there can be different content providers, as I mentioned, can be cloud solutions, can be on-premise solutions. We can basically connect my on-premise world, which sits behind a firewall, with the cloud through the SAP Cloud Connector. We'll talk about security here in just a little bit. So that's now all possible. It's obviously a cloud solution. That means the end users can access the central Launchpad service from pretty much anywhere. And also there's different ways how it can be configured, but in general, it is possible to be accessible from anywhere. Doesn't have to be in your local network. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And it basically combines different applications from multiple different content providers into one Launchpad. That ultimately means we can have a Launchpad that has applications, Fiori applications, or even legacy transactions, GUI transactions that we enabled for Fiori from multiple SAP systems like S/4HANA, BW, CRM, SAP Access Control, GRC, but then also from cloud solutions. If you have like SuccessFactors and you want to include some of the ESS, MSS type of applications from SuccessFactors that users might need, you can also include them into the central Launchpad. The central Launchpad obviously comes with different security measures that we can do. So basically, like all SAP Cloud solutions, it authenticates through the IAS, which is the Identity Authentication Service, where we can enable single sign-on. We can include corporate identity providers for the authentication procedure, which we'll also talk about here in a couple of slides. So ultimately, the goal is really to consolidate multiple backend server applications into one central Launchpad. The most common use cases, and let me just remove my face here very quickly so you can see the slides. So obviously the most common use cases are that we have a central point of access for our end users, meaning they can access on-premise applications, cloud applications, SAP applications, as well as third-party applications in one central Launchpad. So they have to remember or bookmark one entry point, and then from there they can access all different type of applications. That's the biggest, or one of the biggest use cases from an end user perspective. From an extensibility perspective, obviously within that central Launchpad, we can not only include SAP standard applications, we can also include our custom built applications. So if you have like a side-by-side extension in the cloud, or you're extending, or just building custom applications, you can also bring them into that central Launchpad. So you don't have to build a front end, for your custom applications. You can just include them directly in that central Launchpad. The external facing scenario, as I already mentioned, that's obviously a very smooth and easy way to enable on-premise applications that sit behind a firewall to the outside world. Ultimately means, with the cloud connector, we can establish a secure connection between the on-premise world, which is behind a firewall, and the cloud. And so ultimately your end users, they can be anywhere in the world. Whether it's good or bad, that's a different conversation. But ultimately, whether they are accessing the central Launchpad from a desktop device or a mobile device, whether they sit in the US or in Europe, it doesn't matter. They can access any type of application that we want them to access. Again, there's settings and configuration that we can do. We can restrict access and so on. But by default, it is possible to access our on-premise applications that sit behind a firewall from the cloud. With the Central Launchpad, also a lot of customers and companies are talking about a cloud transition. So, moving into the cloud first strategies are big topics for a lot of companies. So with the Central Launchpad, we can obviously also elevate that experience directly into the cloud. So we can get rid of the on-premise Launchpad and move that directly into the cloud. It's a smooth transition over into the cloud. So those are, at the end of the day, the most common use cases. Again, here, not the best graphic here, but this is a standard graphic from SAP, obviously, that shows that, again, we have one central Launchpad. Please ignore the SAP Cloud Platform. It's an old, outdated screenshot, but it's still very accurate. It's just the naming is a little bit off. It's not the SAP Cloud Platform anymore. It's the Business Technology Platform. But from the how it works, it's still very accurate. So ultimately, again, with one central Launchpad, we can access different applications, whether they're in the cloud, on-premise, multiple on-premise applications, or even non-SAP third-party applications. That's the ultimate use case for the Central Launchpad service. The Central Launchpad service, when we talk about security or how to access the Central Launchpad service, there's a few things that we have to keep in mind. So there's two different access scenarios that we use. It's the tunneled access scenario, and then we also have a direct access scenario. The tunneled access scenario ultimately means that between the cloud and the on-premise world, we have a secure tunnel, as you can see here in the gray. Let me see if you can see my mouse, but it's here where you have the firewall, and then the right-hand side where we have the on-premise and the internet. We have basically that secure tunnel, and that secure tunnel is established and provided by the SAP Cloud Connector. So the SAP Cloud Connector is an application that we install on the on-premise side, and that Cloud Connector then ultimately connects my on-premise systems with the SAP Business Technology Platform and establishes a secure tunnel. So the communication goes through that secure tunnel. If you look at the security, how that looks like on the next slide, just to confuse everyone a little bit more, ultimately we have our end users here on the left-hand side. As I mentioned, they can access from different clients, whether it's mobile devices, desktop devices, tablets. It doesn't matter whether it's an iOS, Android, or Windows-based, or whatever it is. They can just go into a browser and access that central Launchpad. Obviously, they have to authenticate themselves, so they need a user and password or a mean of authentication, whether it's multi-factor or whatever. That's what we define in the identity authentication, the IES. And ultimately, we can then, the end user connects or logs on to the Launchpad, and then through the IES, they can authenticate themselves. So the Launchpad service ultimately redirects the authentication to the IES. And then the IES can, that's how you set it, depends how you set it up, redirect the authentication token to a corporate IDP. So if you have a corporate IDP at an identity provider, you can utilize that. And then the corporate IDP basically returns a SAML response to the IES that the IES accepts. And then that SAML token gets accepted, gets signed, and ultimately the user will be able to access the application. For on-premise systems, we have principal propagation. It goes through the SAML bearer token and X59 certifications, but that ultimately means that the authorizations will be propagated from the on-premise into the cloud. So ultimately, it's still respecting the authorizations a user has here on the right-hand side in our S/4HANA on-premise application, for example. The tunneled access, once again, means that the end user from anywhere in the world can directly access the central Launchpad and there also access our on-premise applications. The other scenario, which is the direct access, is a little bit different. That's also one thing that some customers decide to do. Has pros and cons as always, and there's reasons why customers use this approach. In the direct access, it's a little bit different. We can see that here, we basically have the end user, and for the end user to access the central Launchpad and the applications therein, they need to be connected to the internal network. You can see it here. We have the firewall, where we have on the left-hand side, we have the internet. On the right-hand side, we have the on-premise, the internal, the corporate network. And in the direct access scenario, in order for the end user to connect to, for example, S/4HANA, to our core business applications, they need to be in the local network. So it doesn't work if they're just connecting from somewhere on a browser, on a tablet, but they're not connected with VPN or something like that. They cannot access the business applications. So that's also one scenario that is possible. Also, from a security perspective, obviously, very similar to what we saw before. We have, again, the user opens the Launchpad side, the central Launchpad then service redirects the authentication to the IES. So we're still using and utilizing the IES. The IES, again, redirects to a corporate IDP where the user authenticates themselves, like Office 365, for example, does the user password, maybe a multi form of authentication, like a token or a PIN code that needs to be added. And then, ultimately, the user gets access as well. Again, the difference here again is the user needs to be in the local network. That's the big difference between the tunneled access and the direct access. Again, as I mentioned, there's pros and cons. Just think about that when you do it, when you implement the central Launchpad service. Make sure you consider that depending on how you want to do it. Which scenario you want to use. As I mentioned, and I'll quickly want to show you just a little bit around the central Launchpad service. So it's pretty straightforward. It's a super slim, easy to understand service from SAP on the Business Technology Platform. It's available in the trial version, so you can just follow the link here from the Discovery Center, and it will basically introduce the Launchpad service. And then you can also enable it in your trial account. So on the BTP, you can ultimately create a trial account. And within that trial account, you can deploy a Launchpad service. And then that Launchpad service, you can configure it. You can even connect it to your on-premise applications if you will. That is technically possible. It doesn't restrict it. You obviously need the authorizations, you need the cloud connector and all that. And then you can ultimately set it up. So let me just switch my screen here and I'll quickly show you. Perfect. So I'm here now in my Business Technology Platform. So that's the backend ultimately where I have the access. And let me just give me 1 second. Yep, here we go. So you can see here, this is basically a sub account that I have. So you obviously, if you have a global account as a company account, then you can deploy a sub account that then hosts or houses that central Launchpad service. There's different connectivity that we have to take care of, the cloud connector, which I'll show here in a second. If you enable the Launchpad service in your trial, then you will be in the trial environment. I'm here in my productive environment, which is just a test account I have here, but this is ultimately my productive environment. Would look very similar in your trial. Ultimately, what do we have? We can see here when I go to instances and subscriptions, and as always, I have the timeout. I talked for too long, so let me just quickly re-authenticate here for a second. Let's hope it's a little bit faster than it was in the morning. I tried it in the morning and it was a little bit slow. That sometimes happens, especially when I do demonstrations. Let's just quickly let it load. Just give it 1 second. And then I hope I'm able to show to you. So ultimately, from a configuration perspective, we obviously need a SAP account. Then we can subscribe and deploy the Launchpad service. In a trial account, that's super easy. It's available. If you have a business account, a paid account or pay-as-you-go account, a company account, then obviously you need a license for it that you can purchase, or you have to purchase, and then you can subscribe to the Launchpad service. Let me just quickly refresh here. Let's hope it works, because I really wanted to show it to you. So deployment is rather simple. There's also good documentation on help.sap.com of how it can be configured. Once you have it deployed, the service running, then there's obviously a couple of connectivity that we have to set up, especially if you want to connect our on-premise world. So if we want to connect to the on-premise world, then what we have to do is we have to connect that cloud connector. And you can see it also here. I'm just quickly switching here. So this is a cloud connector. And you can see here in my cloud connector, basically I have it connected, super simple to connect, just a couple of steps that are needed. And then in my cloud connector, what I have to do is I have to expose my on-premise applications to that cloud, to the cloud, so to that SAP account. And we can see it here. I have different virtual hosts or servers at the end of the day exposed. I have some exposed through RFC, others through HTTP or HTTPS, depending on what you're doing. And you can see here I have like an S4 a demo system. I have an S4 HANA test system, and then also a couple of other systems that I have exposed. And obviously, in order for me to use this also expired, so everything is expired here. Give me a second. In order for the cloud to access the on-premise world, we obviously have to be able to access it. So that needs to be exposed. It also needs to be enabled. And here also, when we go again into the cloud to on-premise connections here, for example, for my S4 demo environment, you can see here, I had to also expose resources. So even if we just connect a system, within the cloud connector, we can define what do we want to expose to the cloud. So here I just did everything, following basically /SAP. So ultimately all the Fiori, applications are exposed through that. Again, I'm just testing here, but you could also very specifically say which, URL passes, if you do Fiori, for example, are exposed to the cloud. So it doesn't have to be all. We can also limit it directly in the cloud connector. That is possible. But that ultimately needs to happen. So let's see. Here we go. So this is again back on BTP. Ultimately, what I have here, if you go to instances and subscriptions, we can see I have the Launchpad service here as an application deployed. So we have here the Launchpad service. That's what's deployed. I have it subscribed. So that's what's running. Let's just open that very quickly in a new tab. But before I go there, I want to show you one or two more things. So ultimately, we have the cloud connector connected. So that's a connection that needs to happen. So we need to, as I mentioned, that the secure tunnel needs to be established. That's what the cloud connector does. And we can see it here. This is ultimately the systems that are exposed in the cloud connector are showing up here. So as soon as we change something back here, if I take something out, it will go away here in the cloud. So those are live connected. And I can only access what I have exposed in the cloud connector. From a setup perspective, obviously, we then have to define the destinations, as we can see here. So I have my S4D and my S4T, my S4 HANA demo and my S4 HANA test. I have that connected. I'm mentioning that also because I want to show you that on the Launchpad, then I have one app from either application server that we can access. Obviously, here we have principal propagation, stuff like that needs to be configured. There's runtime and design time destination that need to be set up, but that's all defined in the documentation. Also, in order for us to access content, we will see that if I now switch over to the Launchpad service, so this is the Launchpad service. Let me just log in here locally. If I'm in the Launchpad service, obviously, there's a couple of things that we need to do. We have here a site directory. At first, site directory are those central Launchpads that we define. You see here, I have more than one. That is possible. So we can define one central Launchpad for all our users. That's one approach. But we could also break it out and have multiple Launchpads. That's also possible. We say, okay, in one, they can maybe access, some core applications, then we have others where they can access some others. That's also possible. So you can see here, we have multiple that we have set up. The site directory, obviously we can just create one here. Super simple. Let's just call it test here for a second. The site can be created, and then obviously that site allows me to do certain configurations. So for example, one of the common things now is how do we want to show the applications? Do we want to use the old approach with the groups, or do we want to use the pages and spaces? That's, for example, one thing. Do we enable personalization so users can move apps and add apps, or they cannot? So a lot of things or just a couple of things I would say we can define here. Also timeouts and so on. And then obviously also which roles, which items they will be able to access. So we could here have just a couple of roles exposed. We could add them here, the ones that I want to have in this Launchpad, and then expose them directly here, so that would be possible. Obviously, we have the content providers that I have here. So that's what we have defined. So we can see it here. I have my S/4HANA test system. I have my S/4HANA demo system. I have some HTML5 apps. I also have here IHE, but I have an issue here at the moment. So I'm basically connecting multiple applications or content providers to that central Launchpad. It's now called Channel Manager. Used to be called Content Provider. Now they just call it Channel Manager. If I expose a system like an S/4HANA system, in S/4HANA, I also have to expose content. So which Fiori applications, for example, I want to expose, or which roles and groups and stuff I want to expose. That's a job that we can run in the backend to expose those roles and groups and spaces, pages into the central Launchpad. So that's not by default. We have to expose that content so that we can see it here. And then ultimately, once we have this connected, I won't show how we do that. That's all in the documentation. But if you have that connected, then we run an update, then we get that content exposed. Now here, obviously, I don't have much exposed. I just have a few things exposed that we can see here. So we have, for example, here from S4D, I have ultimately one role exposed, as well as a group and some applications. The same for S4T. So I don't have much exposed, just for the simple demo here. But you can see I have content from S4D, as well as some local applications that I have exposed here. And that's ultimately, when we go into the site, if we run the site, even just the one that we just created, you see there's the one we just created, and we go into that and I added a couple of roles. Now we should be able to see the content that's basically exposed. Now here, you can see I have display material application, that's MM03 ultimately. The authentication doesn't work for one reason, because I wanted to show you that it's going to different backend systems. You can see here, I have the same app, super simple, super stupid as well, but just to show you, we have the display material MM03 twice, comes from two different application servers. If I click here, you can see here that I get the logon screen, the SAP GUI logon screen at the end of the day. And you can see here, it wants me to connect to S4D. So I don't have SSO enabled on purpose. Obviously, in your real environment, you would have it enabled. You don't want users to log in here. That would all be automatically. But here I have it on purpose. So we can see if I run display material, the first app, I would be in S4D, my demo system. If I go back and run the other application, the second one, we can see that the logon will prompt me for S4T. So ultimately, if I would log in here with my user password or then SSO, obviously the preferred way, I would be able to access MM03. This is just a legacy application directly out of the cloud. Okay, so one Launchpad, multiple different applications from multiple different backend application servers, all in one central Launchpad, if you will. That's ultimately what that central Launchpad allows us to do. Obviously, that content, which roles, the groups, all that stuff, that needs to be exposed from the backend into the cloud, and then we can use it in the Launchpad to work with it. Authorization-wise, as I mentioned, that's ultimately coming from the backend system. So the users still need to be authorized on the backend. It's principal propagation, so the authorizations will still remain in the backend. We don't have to deal with that in the cloud. It's still in the backend. We're basically ultimately only enabling the front end in the cloud. So we're moving it from the embedded on-premise approach into the cloud. That's ultimately what we're doing. Obviously, it's a little bit more tricky than just that. But again, the help is all there. It's pretty straightforward. I was able to do it. That means you will be able to do it as well. That's pretty much it. It's a straightforward service. I like it. It's very user friendly. It's also very affordable from a licensing cost. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money for customers. So it's a very interesting service. It allows us to combine and go back to that central hub approach that we had in the beginning, or that was recommended in the beginning with S/4HANA and Fiori, now on a higher level directly in the cloud. That's ultimately what that central Launchpad service provides us. Everything that we already talked about before, and also the next couple of sessions that we have planned to talk more about Fiori, that is still very much current also for the central Launchpad service, because again, building the content, the catalogs and so on, that still needs to happen. Authorizing the users, all that also needs to happen in the exact same fashion. So we're not changing that approach. We still, as a security admin, we still need to understand the tools and all that stuff that we need. The Launchpad service is just a front end. It's just how we enable and display applications to the end users. That's what that central Launchpad service allows us to do. With that, this is pretty much what I wanted to cover today. We have a couple of more sessions coming up in regards to Fiori. So we'll look into some support tools and helpful applications for end users to find issues and navigate better through Fiori. We'll look more specifically into authorization debugging. So if there's any authorization issues with Fiori, they're not always as straightforward as they were with the ABAP, the old ABAP world transactions. So there's a couple of things, especially when there's like CDS views and different things. And also not everything that looks like a authorization failure on the front end is necessarily an authorization failure. It can be anything. It can be a service that's not active, or ICF nodes that are not activated, or anything else. It doesn't always have to be authorization related, even though it looks like that. So that's also what we want to cover in an upcoming session. And then obviously when it comes to implementing the Fiori and running with Fiori authorization concept, it's a very time-consuming task, can be very tricky. There are automation tools, there's master applications tools to do that more efficiently and in mass. We'll also talk about that. And then we'll break with Fiori and talk about different stuff. We have a couple of sessions that I've been working on lately is in regards to IAG, the Identity Access Governance, the access control in the cloud, as many call it. We'll do an overview and then deep dive into different use cases. We also have, we will have a couple of guest speakers from SAP when it comes to IAG to also get their view on roadmap and what will come up with IAG in the future. So as always, if you sign up to our newsletter, or if you follow myself or Exciting, you will be up to date with the upcoming webinars. With that, thank you very much as always. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for joining today. Spread the word if you find it interesting. Please invite your friends and colleagues. Here are contact details if you have any questions, you want to reach out to me directly. Either shoot me an email or contact me on LinkedIn. With that, thank you very much, everyone. Wish you a good rest of your day, and see you in the next one.